Hello. Sorry for the headphones. I had some microphone issues this morning. Reflections on happiness. This was a very, very rough week for me. I struggled more than usual to find inner calm, peace, and a return to my typical more optimistic outlook. My experience happily celebrating the 4th of July with grandkids and family changed in an instant. The Highland Park tragedy served as a painful reminder of the deep-rooted evil around us, especially with it happening in a community close to me and to people I love. And it is still reverberating loud inside my soul. We clearly live in an unusually disruptive time with uncertainties fueling evil behaviors all around us. It makes it harder for anyone to stay sane. It remains to be seen whether or not we have now possibly reached a critical mass where a louder majority of people have had enough of this type of senseless violence affecting completely innocent people. I typically don't spend any time on these pages on politics. More often than not, I feel that is futile. As you well know, I don't believe politics is the answer. Certainly not in its current form. We spend too much of our energy investing our hopes in people far away who ultimately do what's best for them, not for us. The answer is for more and more people to have better conversations, get more involved in things they can affect, and ultimately create a more democratized democracy. The first step is to disagree more agreeably and practice more humility, vulnerability, and a willingness to listen and engage with people we don't know. First then, with reduced fear and hostility, can we find common ground and create a more perfect union. I believe this almost unilaterally. But given what happened in the last few weeks alone, I will make an exception, as I wish to speak my mind briefly but passionately before I dive into the topic of happiness. I was in the Marines. I was trained using an AK-47. I am at a complete loss for what freedom we are protecting by allowing civilians the right to buy these kinds of automatic weapons. For what possible use? Firearms are now the leading cause of death in children up to 18 years old. That is a massive failure on all our parts. It shouldn't be that way, and it certainly doesn't have to be that way. I consider myself to be an extremely tolerant person to all kinds of views. I respect most of them, as long as they're kind in nature and portrayed humanly, including Second Amendment rights, of course. I'm not extreme in my views about anything. I can find reason in almost all positions, and typically I try my best to understand them. But giving people the right to buy automatic weapons is a crazy idea we stand alone in somehow protecting. And it has had nothing but catastrophic consequences. It has been abused and cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And it has to stop now. And beyond the obvious bloodshed and personal tragedy that defies imagination, these automatic weapons also rob us of one of our fundamental rights as democratic citizens: to exist safely in a public space, to not worry or check the exit signs upon entering a room, to walk through the world without the reasonable anxiety of you and your loved ones facing gunfire. Whether that be sending your kids to school, sitting in your place of worship, shopping at a grocery store, or attending a concert. When we think about our fundamental rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it's hard for me to conceive but how these weapons don't impede on all three. Okay, sorry about that. I will now take a deep breath and turn back to my normal habitat and to something closer to where I typically spend my energy and time. Happiness. And as I just stated, I had to work really hard this week to get back into that lane. Happiness is obviously both a daunting question as well as an important topic. I can't easily do it justice in any one post. And to some extent, most of my writing hovers around the ingredients for how to live a happy life, collectively and individually. I mean, what other possible objectives can there be? There are many dimensions of happiness that get us in trouble. It's certainly relative. Happy relative to what and whom? We are mirroring creatures by nature, and we keep comparing and contrasting our own situation to that of others. But what brings others joy and contentment is not one size fits all. It's also fleeting. Happy when? Clearly, all humans suffer. All humans go through difficult patches of time, and all of us eventually die. So when do you exactly measure your happiness? Is one such time more important than others? Are they weighed equally, or are they like compounding interest? A little happy all the time accumulates to very happy later? Or does it work differently? Is happiness perhaps more like a bank account? You must fill it up in order to have something to take out. Like balancing your happiness checkbook with other emotional investments and withdrawals. Is it a zero-sum game, or will more happiness beget more happiness? So many questions to ponder. One definition, or at least consideration, that I have found helpful is from Laurie Santos. More on her below. She talks about happiness in two distinct categories. An emotional aspect she often refers to as happiness in your life, and then a more cognitive aspect she refers to as happiness with your life. I think it's a very, very useful distinction. Happiness in is what I think of more as happiness now. I also think this is what most people think about when they discuss happiness. If you Google happiness, you typically find images in that happy now domain. Smiling faces, vacation pictures and beaches and drinks and camaraderie and fun times. A lot of biology is at play, whether that's via social contagions, that we do what others do, or the pleasure-centered neurotransmitters that steer us towards pushing our instant gratification buttons. Before I dive into happiness with, let me state clearly, these moments of happiness, however fleeting, are really important. They contribute significantly towards a better lived experience. I mean, what would life be like without that moment of music, dinner with friends, or laughter? To some extent, they are what life is supposed to be like, at least in good times, right? But I also think our pursuit of these aspects of happiness is a bit of a trap. They are at best incomplete, and at worst, distractions towards other forms of happiness. They are akin to head fakes. We get drawn towards something we think makes us happy, only to find much later that they didn't. When we think and dream about these moments, they're also always so pleasant. But when we achieve them, the gratification doesn't always last very long, and it's often not as intensely satisfying as you would like it to be. And sometimes they literally and figuratively cause hangovers. So that brings me to the happiness with dimension. This is what we can think of as the more retrospective aspect of happiness. Are you happy with your life? Are you happy with what you have created? Or at least with what you believe you are striving towards? Is there something significant missing that you feel, but perhaps can't identify or locate specifically? Many people know something is missing in their lives, but they don't always know what. I guess this is the deathbed test. Towards the end of your life, will you look at it and say, yes, I lived a good life, I did my best, and I'm truly happy with how it all turned out? Of course, the crux of this lies within the fact that there is a trade-off between the in and the with aspect of happiness. Not always, but often. No gain without pain, you know. We have to sometimes make short-term investments or even sacrifices in order to contribute to the kind of life we can be happy with. However, and equally so, we cannot delay all forms of gratification such that the journey towards the life we want is miserable and free from any form of happiness. On that path, we won't find many friends, experience much love, and probably not find the inspiration and energy we need to take us to the ultimate destination of a life we are happy with. So how do you find the right balance? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? For me, I can say without much doubt that I'm guilty of overdosing on with and starving the in aspects of my own happiness allocation. The book I'm thinking of writing might be called Living in Reverse, as I am so completely convinced and committed to the notion of a happy with my life philosophy. However, I do need to work a bit harder on the happy in dimension. I'm not so good at vacations, free time, play, and share in the movement joy. I'm increasingly committed to improving myself here and now, and with more grandkids, older age, and friends with similar aspirations, I'm hopeful I will find a better balance. Help with this endeavor is both wanted and much appreciated. However, I will end by stating that our culture at large would probably benefit from shifting more of its happiness narrative towards a longer-term happiness with ideology. We live in such a short-term focused world, and more people are struggling to find happiness. If you had a time machine and could go back in time, whether that's 50, 100, or 500 years, and you ask those people to list things they wanted that would make them happier, I would argue that we have achieved almost all of those things for most people by now. We live longer, we have more access to food, we have higher incomes, we have more material wealth, better education, bigger houses, etc. And yet, I'm not sure our average happiness is much higher. We keep selling more and more happiness in when people want more happiness with. At least that's what I think is going on. That's also why I'm a purpose digger and a long-term fanatic, to a fault, perhaps. There's much to share on this topic, of course, but I will simply share these 3 pieces of relevant fodder that inspired me as I was thinking more this week about happiness. First, a reminder for those that haven't read Scott Peck's classic book, The Road Less Traveled. It inspired me and my own thinking powerfully around happiness and life in general, and the importance of delayed gratification in particular many years ago. I mentioned Laurie Santos above. You can read more about her on her website, but I also liked Shane Parrish interview on these topics of happiness that I have posted a link to in the newsletter. And finally, Sam Harris interviewed Morgan Housel, who writes a lot about money. Since money often is so wrapped up with happiness, I found their conversation to be helpful, contextual, and very, very thoughtful. Have a great week.